All right. Okay. All right. So we got a bunch of people on now. Cool. All right. I got my chats pulled up. I'm trying to monitor the chat on the side too as we go through this, but all right. Well, good evening, everybody. So Chase here from Quantico Warfighting Society. In Session 2, I guess you can call it, of the Flashpoint Taiwan series, and hopefully you got a chance to read over the article that came out last week that was written by Sinotalk. It was on weather and terrain. So our first session, the first week, we just did an overview, basically a brief overview of the history of China and Taiwan, kind of the different varying conflicts that have happened over the last 70 years or so, and what has led to the point that we're at right now. That recording of 2 weeks ago's session, that one is up on the Substack for Lethal Mind Journal. So if you want to navigate to Lethal Mind Journal at another time, you can watch that one. We ran for about 35-ish minutes on the class or the talk, and then the rest of it was really just a back and forth question and answer period. So we'll kind of do the same kind of thing today. I want to do less of a long form talk on this one, and more of I'll talk through a couple of slides and then just open it up so we can kind of have some back and forth amongst the people inside of here, because there's honestly just a lot more smarter minds in here than just myself. I'm not an expert on any of this. I just find what we do in this profession fascinating, and I want to expand it out to more people. And I'm glad that there's other people that are willing to spend some of their time off, expanding their mind on this stuff too. So we'll get started, but Session 2, weather and terrain. I figured the best way for us to walk through this one was to kind of do a walkthrough of this from the perspective of if there was an invasion, let's go through it in that sense. So we'll start off by going across the strait. What does that look like crossing the strait as far as weather and terrain go? What does the beachheads look like, and what are the possible avenues of approach? I'll show you some of the possible landing spots that have been identified, as well as some ports, some deep water ports, areas of importance, things like that. We'll talk about some of the terrain that would actually have to be maneuvered across. We'll talk about some urban terrain, because there's plenty of that on Taiwan as well. And then we'll wrap it up with some considerations about weather. So just to start out, right here, what you're seeing is a elevated terrain map kind of thing of Taiwan. A little bit blurry, but you can kind of see Taiwan is dominated by a massive mountain range that runs through the middle of the island, essentially splitting the east and the west coast of it. Not a lot of population on the east side. As you can see, there's a smaller sliver of land on that side. Most of the population and everything is going to be on that west side, and the west side is what faces China, and you'll see that in a couple of the upcoming slides. You'll see China on the other side of the strait and whatnot. But that mountain range is pretty huge. Definitely considerable piece of terrain when you're looking at that. So one of the best things about Taiwan, and this is from the Taiwan perspective, is their best defense is literally their geography. And what it comes down to is the coastline of Taiwan is pretty formidable if you're looking at being an invader. There's not a whole lot of places that you can actually land, and we'll start getting into some of these slides so you can actually see what that looks like. If I can start clicking through this. All right, so getting into it, there is basically, depending on who you read or where you're looking at, it's about 11 to 14 potential landing sites. So basically beaches that are able to support any kind of amphibious landing. The reason for that is because a lot of Taiwan's coastline is extremely harsh when it comes to any ability to go from shore to sea. There's not a lot of beach. There's a lot of very rocky areas, a lot of cliffs, especially if you're on the east side. A lot of it is pretty cliffy. a ton, like if you've ever been to Okinawa, for example, you know, like what the seawalls are like, and they have those big concrete barriers that kind of break up the waves and whatnot. A lot of the coastline is like that. So really, there's very, very limited beaches, and the beaches that are available are concentrated in certain areas. So as you can see on here, to the left-hand side, top left-hand of the screen is going to be China, and we'll have a couple more slides up here that will point some possible staging areas that China would be using to stage their troops for an invasion. But what you can see right here, as far as all the beaches that are available for a landing, is there's a concentration on the lower side of Taiwan, and then there's another concentration up on the top that kind of surrounds Taipei. And we'll see where Taipei is a little bit later. I have some animations that I recorded off of Google Earth just to kind of do some zoom out, zoom in things to show you a little bit of these different areas. So the difference between that last slide and this one is showing the essential ports that are on Taiwan. This gets really important a little bit later when you're starting to think about how an amphibious invasion would go. Because the coastline is very, very limited, because the beaches are very limited, a successful invasion would probably hinge on the ability to, one, get a beachhead, but then essentially transition to getting a deep water port as quickly as possible. Because if they don't have access to it, if an invading force doesn't have access to a deep water port on Taiwan, their ability to offload troops in the quantity that they're going to need is going to be extremely hampered. And so I actually chose 3 of these different ports, 3 of the ones that are probably most talked about, to show you what they actually look like. So we'll see some videos of that in just a second. But since we have this map up right now, really the big 2 ports that pretty much everybody talks about is the one to the very south, and that's Kaohsiung, and then the one up top, which is the port of Taipei, which is actually next to Taipei, the city. I have one in the middle that I'll show you that's actually not on here. It's a little bit smaller, but I'll show you that in a little bit for a certain reason. So again, these are the ports. I'm going to flip back really quick just so you can see the potential landing sites or the beaches that are available for an amphibious landing, essentially. So pretty much concentrated around the same areas for the most part. There's a couple of outliers when it comes to the ports, because they're not dependent on beaches, obviously, but for the most part in the same areas, and those are the areas that are most populated for the most part too. So this one was a slide that was created by Sinotalk, and again, this is kind of the same thing that we were just seeing on the last one, but just all conjugated in one slide. But in addition, there is now the Chinese placement of where their primary staging areas are. Sino, did you want to chime in really quick and just talk through anything on here since you made this one?
Yeah, so this is important to note that the staging areas, because as Chase actually mentioned that on the eastern side of Taiwan, the eastern coast of Taiwan, is very hilly, very rocky terrain. The same could be said on the Chinese coast. I don't know. Chase, stop me if I'm stealing your thunder, please. I mean, if I am or not.
No, man, you're good. Please, I don't have anything on China really mapped out in this.
Okay. Yeah. So regarding the coast, that's the reason why, for that long coastline, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 areas in which this PLA will stage their various forces, is because realistically that's the only areas they can do it. And so we know if we were to see any large concentrations of PLA troops in those areas outside of the regular amphibious training exercises that they do twice a year, that's a key indicator of invasion.
Yeah, so a lot of the exercises they do nowadays do center around basically prep for amphibious invasion, and a lot of them are happening out of these different areas. But yeah, like Simon said, I mean, there's really only so many places you can stage for an invasion, cross-strait invasion, and most of them are going to be right here in the. Basically, I'm pretty sure most of this is in the Fujian district. maybe the top two are a little bit outside of it, but there's only so many places they can stage to actually conduct a cross-strait invasion. So this is where we see the majority of the buildup, and you can see kind of where they would be heading towards. Again, the two most talked about areas are going to be in the south at the Port of Kaohsiung, and then up top next to Taipei. And so we'll see a little bit more of that. I'm going to get into the animations right now. But really quickly, out of the chat, Lance, you were talking about you couldn't really find what the size of the landing element that these beaches could support. I spent a whole lot of time on Google Earth just zooming in on beaches this past week to try and check it out. It's hard to tell, but for the most part, these beaches are pretty small. Even the beaches that are available are pretty small. I mean, it's not like landing on the coast of San Diego or anything where you have miles and miles of beaches. Like the beaches that are here are not that long, and they're not that deep either. They're like the area is very it's very limited. I'll have some pictures up here in a little bit, and you can kind of make some judgment on it. Some of them could support probably a regiment, maybe you know, some obviously a battalion, but honestly, a lot of these are I would even say like a battalion minus. They're pretty tight. They're just not good. Not good for an invading force. Great for Taiwan. Easily defendable for the most part. But we'll get into that right now. And then Michael, if you want to talk about that when we get to the question and answer period, if you want to bring that question up, we can maybe get into that. So I started from south to north, right? And so we're going to start at the southern port. And the reason for that is because Kaohsiung is the largest cargo port of the 6 main ports that are in Taiwan. And it accounts for 62% of all the cargo volume that enters the island. So this is really the hub of everything that's coming in and out of the island. The other ones, you know, the other 6 or the other 5 or 6 major ports, they're accounting for the other 40%. So you can see how important this southern one really is. So let's run this. So zooming in on the south, there is a beach that actually borders this there's this little sliver of the port. So basically there's 2 entrances to the port, the southern side and the northern side. There's a beach on that little sliver, and you're going to see that as I zoom in a little bit more too. It is possible to land troops, but it'd be tough. It's not a huge beach at the same time. And that section of the port doesn't have a land connection, doesn't have a bridge or anything. So if you landed forces there, they could only stay on that sliver. I have some pictures of that in a little bit. But basically, the entrances to all the ports, what you're going to see is the entrances are very, very small. So we can talk about that in just a second, about the considerations for an invading force or for a defending force, about how this looks. So I think right here, I end up moving it and zooming out a little bit because I'm going to show you basically some of the terrain that surrounds the entrance to that port. There's a pretty big little mountain right here that is some dominating terrain looking straight over the entrance to Kaohsiung, the northern entrance. So another consideration kind of when you're looking at this. So based on what you guys have seen, just with that really quick zoom in, we have Sinjin Beach. If you can see the little red marker right there, Sinjin Beach is right there, but that again, it doesn't connect to the actual mainland. It just is part of the port. Let me see if the next slide. All right. So here's the aerial version. Basically, if we were right on top of that mountain, again, or basically the entrance to the port, now we're looking in at the port, and you can see that beach a little bit better to the right-hand side. But again, that doesn't connect to the mainland. But I'll give you a ground view as well. So now this is inside of the port. So you can kind of see how big it is when you're really down there on where the boats are on the level. So just based on that, I'll kind of zoom back. This is the beach. And so you can kind of see the port on the left-hand side. So you can see at this beach, there's a little bit of land, but again, it's pretty tight at the same time. So if you're talking about defending, it's not a huge area to defend. Still pretty tight. So we can kind of just take a quick break right here at this first portion, because this is one of the two biggest potential invasion sites. So I think it's worth just sitting here for a second and then allowing some people to kind of talk about what considerations would you have either as a defending force or an invading force with looking at this port specifically, because this is most likely a port that you absolutely have to seize or absolutely have to try and defend if you're the defender. So what do you guys kind of see, or what are your considerations based off of what you guys see with this? You can just kind of chime in as you see fit.
Real quick, going back to that mountain you were showing a couple minutes ago, I mean, that looks like heaven for forward observers and JTACs.
Yeah.
Looking at the shape of that beach, it looks like it might have a weird tidal pattern.
Yeah, so can you do you have any experience with amphibious landings, and can you talk about what the consideration would be with regards to the tidal pattern?
I do not have a lot of experience with this. I'm very new to a lot of these things, but I could say that the window that you have, how large or how short that is, obviously really affects on how many troops you can flush into a given area, especially given the size constraints and how big of a foothold you can gain. So obviously mass is super important in a small foothold like this. And looking at it, you got a weird crescent shape. It looks like you might have some weird kind of sandbars and such. Just looking at this odd shape of that beach,
Yeah, how it kind of jets out.
it kind of funnels in how you can place your landing craft.
Yeah, so with the tide, I think I have a picture when we get to the Taipei port. So a little bit later in the slideshow, I have a picture of one of the beaches when the tide is out a little bit. And when the tide is out, these beaches get extremely long, which is good in the sense that you can ferry on more equipment and whatnot. But at the same time, I mean, that's like really muddy area or very sandy, muddy, harder to move equipment, but also now your troops and equipment have to travel a further distance under fire if these things are heavily defended at the same time too. So again, best defense for Taiwan is the fact that their island is, an amphibious nightmare when it comes to an amphibious landing. Analyze and educate, when you brought up the fact that dominating terrain is a JTAC or forward observer's heaven, sitting over there. Anybody have any considerations or anything that comes to mind when they think about the entrance to the ports? Because if you're China, you got to be able to make entrance to the ports. If you're Taiwan, you're thinking about keeping China out of the ports. So getting away from just the amphibious landing portion, because yes, this, everybody's going to think about the beach up front, but when we talk about getting actual ships into the port, what are some considerations or what are some things that popped to your guys' mind as you have seen as you see this port?
Just real quick from the China. Oh, I'm sorry.
My bad. Not at all. Please.
Yeah, real quick from the Chinese perspective, if I'm trying to get into this port, obviously dispersion is probably going to be a big consideration for me, since it's very narrow. Obviously, you could only get so much in there at one point. You don't want to get bottled up and bunched together, because again, that's heaven for forward observers and JTACs. They could just rain fire down on you.
To kind of pick that up, when I look at Shenzhen and I look at that channel, from the Taiwanese, I'm expecting nothing but mines.
Yeah.
And any type of way we can try to create more of a bottleneck. But from the PRC, my first thought is, do I have some way to string a bunch of pontoon bridges with maybe that second or third wave, establish a mini staging area on Shenzhen, try and get some bridges out under air cover from the CSGs maybe, and then start getting my troops across and bypass it all.
Okay.
I agree with Lance. I agree with Lance, the importance of that island. It's a little reminiscent, especially with the Marine Corps, the Valley of Incheon and seizing islands within the bay or near shore. I mean, you have to take it. It's half that channel is what it comprises of. You just have to take it.
Yeah, so you're looking at how thin or how narrow these entrances are. If you're on the Taiwan side, I like the idea of getting to Sijin and take that beach, and then just use you can use bridging or whatever it is to kind of work around the entrances. But if you're Taiwan, you're looking at how you're going to defend these entrances. What are you guys thinking about? Any ideas? Sino, if you want to chime in at any point in time too. I mean, I've thought through some of this, but I don't want to just hear myself.
I guess what I'm seeing is the only like feasible strategy that China could employ to take this beach would probably be to set up first, get a beachhead on this initial one, the Sijin beach, and then push through with amphibious vehicles that can land and then take off again. Because I don't see any way of them making it through that bottleneck, especially because there's sea cliffs right there too, right in the entrance, and
Yeah.
it could get so easily blocked up that I feel like they're gonna have to use mass wave tactics and just use waves of amphibious vehicles that are gonna land on the beach first, get a foothold there, and then push in.
Yeah,
And
so
that'll be terrible because it'll be hammered the whole time.
yeah. So the only problem I'd see with something like that is you use amphibious vehicles, right? And let's just say you actually establish a beachhead at Sinjin Beach. I think the redeployment to get across, if that's what you were talking about, it would be pretty hard because this whole side right here, like this is all deep water port. So all this area is area
So
that
they can't even take off again from there.
right. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm sure that maybe somewhere on this there is something that they could deploy down. Maybe there's a ramp somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if there was, but how they would find that, where they, how they'd actually get their AAVs. Let's just say it's down here on the southern side, and they land here, and they have to now maneuver down just to get everybody down through that one access point. Because most of this is going to be, 20-foot walls, drop offs, just like any other deep water port for the most part. So would be pretty difficult to probably do that if there was an ability to. When I look at this and I think about, there's been a few things that I've heard as far as defending these. Like obviously, if you're Taiwan, if you have some kind of notice or some kind of ability to know, like, hey, look, we got 2 weeks, we see massing of forces, something like that. If it's imminent, obviously at that point in time, we're gonna have to stop flow of traffic in here. I'm sure they would just start mining, underwater mines up in this area would be extremely effective. But also I've heard, some more extreme or different kind of measures, sinking a cargo ship inside of these areas. Sink a couple cargo ships here. The southern one, you can kind of block these things off. Also, if you don't even do that, imagine if there is a few sea mines, or if there is ability for somebody to conduct a strike on any kind of incoming Chinese ships. When one goes down or one gets stuck or whatever, like now we have that effective bottleneck and blocking as well. So this is, pretty tough scenario to get them in there. I've heard even dumping oil inside of these areas and lighting it on fire and stuff like that. I've heard the same thing for some of the beachheads, because there is so limited quantity of beachheads that they could actually do something like that. And that would really, that's more so messing with the amphibious force that would be landing if you're doing it on the beachheads. But a little bit unconventional, things that some people haven't thought about, but I have certainly read it in a few places at this point now. So I think it's worth at least bringing up. So I'm going to go to this next one. I think this next one is, let's see where it takes us. Okay, that's the same video. All right, so I believe this next one's going to take us up to Golden Beach. And Sino, I think you actually had Golden Beach listed on yours as well. So the significance of this, there is a port. You're going to see the port in just a second. You can see the entrance right now. Obviously, again, very, very small entrance. This is a really small port too. It's not nearly as big as Kaohsiung. But at the end of the day, deep water port's a deep water port, would be pretty vital if they could get access to it. One of the things I highlight on this one is there's a lot of different like waterways that kind of give access to the mainland too. So you can kind of think about what that, like how you would use that as an invader right now as I go through the rest of this. But one other thing I've mentioned, we have the airport right there. And this beach is a little bit longer, right? And so you can kind of see there's some access points where if you were to land vehicles, pretty easy access to some of the roads and multiple access points to these roads. And these all kind of bring us in to easily accessing that airport, which would be pretty vital. And then it's not far off to get to some of the highways, the 2 highways, and we'll look at what those look like a little bit later on. But looking at this one, anything that comes to mind or anything you guys want to mention when you're looking at this different landing position?
This is a more general question. I'm kind of curious when everyone thinks like what the precursor to an amphibious assault would look like by the PRC. Because obviously tactical surprise would be really, really hard to achieve, especially with how hard it is to disguise preparation and such. So kind of what would people think like the opening salvo would be? Would it be like a large scale barrage? Would it just be they're sending boats ashore? Like what does everyone think that first wave would look like?
All right, what's your schedule look like now? It should pop up.
Has anybody, I mean, I've read plenty of accounts of what they think that would look like. Has anybody else read anything that they want to chime in on and say, what you've kind of read or come to the conclusion on of what that opening few moves would look like?
I know that the article for this one definitely triggered kind of a thought exercise for me, but I don't know. I like the idea of getting my carrier strike groups up to the northern and southern ends of the strait to provide some intermediate range there. I think a first strike with some of the medium range Dongfangs at known C2 and air defense locations on Taiwan would probably be, triggered by the launch of the force across the strait. And then, I'm advancing those ships across under air cover, under conventional artillery fire. If I can get, I don't know what their conventional rounds are like if they have the range on that, but and then I've obviously got some of the longer range hypersonics and cruise missiles to cover the back end from a U.S. approach. That's just, that was me writing on my notepad when I was reading the last article.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of the articles that I've read, there's always a little bit of disparity between the different ones, but for the most part, what I've seen that's pretty consistent is opening move for China is just a pretty intense barrage of missiles at pre-targeted locations. So I'm sure almost every airstrip, if not every airstrip, is targeted. Every known military base, installation, different government and key infrastructure as far as knocking out lights, power, sewage, all kinds of different things like that is pretty consistent across most articles that I've read. So pretty intense missile barrage, followed pretty quickly by fighter jets deploying, and there'd probably be an immediate launch back from Taiwan because they wouldn't destroy everything, of course. And a lot of Taiwan's defenses and some of the stuff that they do have, they have actually hardened it, or they built it into the side of the mountains, different things like that. I know that they have different hangars that are in the side of the mountains to protect some of their jets, and that their jets are able to deploy from the highways, things like that. So I think that's probably what it looked like. There's actually quite a few pretty good videos on YouTube of simulations of different ways that they think it would play out, and they're pretty consistent actually with a lot of the articles that we read in some of the more, I guess, reputable sources. Let's see. I'm trying to zoom back really, or roll back to that wetlands area. So this beach, a little bit nicer for access, of course, but I'm going to zoom back over here real quick. Whoever is about to chime in, you're free to.
Okay, yeah, I apologize. I was dealing with something. Yeah, so regarding the beaches, they're not really good in terms of trying to invade, at least from the PRC's perspective.
No. It's
just the mere fact that, that's the hand that the PRC dealt. I mean, if you've ever seen any of the Hong Kong exercises, especially the recent one, you'll see, especially at the port of Taipei, they've actually staged containers near the water, near inside the port. That looks like all they have to do is like push them over and it'll fall in. I mean, that's essentially what they're there for, so they can destroy the port and deny the PRC or the PLA access to it. Not only that, but just the mere fact that they know that if they lose any port to Taiwan knows that they lose any port, then it's essentially would make it harder for them to push the PLA back and to keep them and to create that time necessary for the U.S. and allies to actually come to Taiwan's aid. And then regarding opening salvos, I know this is a lot, but I was in the middle of doing something else. It was, I believe, Lance, how he said, like, it will be there's going to conduct massive strikes. That is true, but they're going to be, it won't be a, blunt bombardment of like Soviet style. It's going to be using precision guided munitions to destroy every single asset that they can have, that they can actually target, that they have a chance to target for the Taiwanese military has, with a very much emphasis on their airfields, and not only their airfields but also their the C2, and then also the Marine Corps brigades, or the Marine Corps brigades around the Taipei area, and then also the military units around Kaohsiung. Because I believe, Chase, you've seen, from talking about this, how where the major groupings of Taiwanese soldiers throughout the island, at least until the brigade level, and they're usually around they're around Kaohsiung and Taipei, and there's a reason for that. Because those are the two likely approaches that the PRC would do.
Yeah. So good points. Just zoom this out. I'm going to advance this to the next one really quick. I think it's this one. So again, just like Sino was talking, a lot of the concentration of forces are centered around Kaohsiung as well as Taipei. And for obvious reason, those are the two most likely and most vital ports that they could possibly access. If they get either of those ports, like you were saying, game gets a lot harder to defend. And so if they can keep them on the beaches, because the beaches are so shitty, honestly, if they can keep on the beaches and keep the fight there, that helps considerably. So I think this one is Taipei, the port of Taipei. So we'll zoom in on this really quick and you can kind of see it. So Taipei is going to be right there in between Highway 3 and Highway 4. I'm going to zoom over that real quick. You can kind of see that there's that river that comes straight from next to the port of Taipei as well, that enters straight into the city. So here's the port of Taipei. Again, a lot smaller than Kaohsiung, but the second most vital port, most likely because it is on that west side. And then here's that river that enters in next to the port of Taipei and makes its way straight into the urban city. So another consideration, we're talking about some kind of invasion, when I see that, I think about all the operations that we're doing with small watercraft right now in the Marine Corps side with Marine Forces Reserves. We're transforming our AAV companies into small watercraft, and so they're experimenting with a lot of different watercraft right now, and that looks like exactly what I'm thinking right now. So I'm just zooming, basically going down the coastline just so you can kind of see what the beaches look like. None of these look very good, but they are, it is a little bit of a stretch of beach, but it's not like you're going to land a massive amount of forces on most of these unless they're extremely spread out. So let's see. I want to say the next slide I have a picture of. Okay, never mind. So any considerations based off of what Taipei, the port of Taipei looks like for you guys? Or basically any considerations for an invasion force that would be taking the northern part of the island, because it's almost without a doubt that there's going to be an invading force on the southern part of the island. But now when we're getting to the northern part of the island, any considerations or anything that you guys would think about when it comes to being the invading force that has to take this northern part?
It looks very hilly, so as soon as you get the port, you still have a lot of hills you'd have to make your way through to get to the highways and the urban centers, I think.
Yeah, all this course is pretty hilly. Obviously there's some roads, but nothing major. We'll get
You
to
have the benefit of using a river to move large pieces of equipment a little further inland faster, provided you do have the security around that area than you would perhaps at the other zone. I don't know what the length of that river is to the center of Taipei, but it definitely looks like you can substantially move, like I said, heavier pieces of equipment a lot faster over water than you could over land.
Yeah, that's definitely where my mind goes to, is thinking about, not necessarily diversionary tactics, because it can be hard to really pull off any kind of diversion. But if you have forces landing on the beaches a little bit south of here, if you have some stuff happening here at the port, if you're able to funnel some forces into the river and get them up to, land somewhere over here, and basically have access straight to the city, seems like a pretty distinct advantage. And again, this is one of the bigger, this is an actual river, but there's a lot of different little waterways that come in down the coastline. It's just, not all of them are next to anything that's key that they want to access. This is Taipei, obviously a lot more important. But there is a lot of those small areas that could be used in some kind of effort to get forces in past the beaches. So this is a photo of Taipei, just to give you some context as to what that urban environment looks like. 2.6 million people live inside of the in New Taipei, which is going to be the actual city area. But then there's 7 million people total in the greater metropolis area of Taipei. So, when it comes to terrain, urban terrain is a thing as well. And it'd be extremely vital for them to get access to Taipei, because that is where the capital is. That's where a lot of the government infrastructure and all that stuff is going to be at. Considerations, anybody got some background in training for urban environments that wants to speak up and kind of talk through what kind of things go through your mind, either as a defender or as an attacker in a situation like this? I'm gonna read through some of this chat too. You guys can think about that.
I don't know. I look at the density of that and all the varying topology, and my mind goes to the fact that I don't think it's worth it. It's not Flujo for, you can't just blow the building. You don't have enough munitions or supply to do that. I don't know. I think I would want to start looking at do I have routes to bypass the urban area? Do I even have to, what's the risk to my beachhead, my supply line if I just bypass the city altogether and get to the interior and try to encircle it half land, half sea and starve it.
Sino, do you have any kind of things that you can chime in on as to the importance of taking any of the areas inside of Taipei as well? Riley, if you wanted to hop in there, I know you're about to say something, feel free.
Yeah, my comment was just small, which is, I mean, Taipei is, it's your political center of Taiwan. I mean, it's not a big island. I mean, if you're really gonna think about a cost that you're gonna solve, I mean, this is unfortunately, probably the one that's worth it for the PRC and the PLA to take. I really think it's a question of what are their considerations when it comes to civilian casualties, how heavy-handed do they want to be, and then what are their considerations for taking casualties on their own side.
No, I mean, Riley is right, but then also just the mere fact that I think they will try to take Taipei. They most definitely will, either through like the siege, or even better, like them actually conquering the city itself. Like I could see them actually going through and recreating Grozny, but on the Battle of Grozny on a much wider scale, just so they can get the image of them raising the PRC flag over the presidential palace of that's within Taipei. Because for China, it'll be a nationalist victory for them. It would be a victory of nationalism, saying that we as the PLA finally ended the civil war after X number of years. So
yeah, just like Rarish is saying, it'd be a massive like propaganda win too, just to, like you were saying, to raise the flag over one of these buildings up here in Taipei. Yeah, I think it's a must take, and I think that they're certainly planning for it. A couple of people mentioned, how heavy-handed they want to come in, how it's not Fallujah for, like you said earlier, you can't just level buildings. One of the big considerations I hear talked about in pretty much every video or article, that I go through is what civilian casualties and what collateral damage is going to do for this. If we're talking about like getting the international community on the side of Taiwan very quickly, I think the civilian populace and what they're recording and what they're posting and putting out there, and obviously their means and abilities to actually post and put things out onto the web is going to be severely degraded, because probably opening moves is going to take down a lot of the communication infrastructure, and it's going to be very hard to do so. But that is going to play huge into getting the consensus of the international community to want to get on board with helping defend Taiwan. Here's just another view. So from the other side, so you can kind of see the mountain range in the background. So where Taiwan is not urban, where there's not city, where there's not houses, it's just like goes straight into jungle or wetlands and mountains. So the terrain is nuts. I think I have some more pictures of the mountains a little bit later on, but obviously urban fighting or urban terrain, extremely difficult for many reasons. Obviously going into a huge city like this would be, that would be something that, I mean, I'm trying to think back through history when, World War II is, and it wasn't the same, obviously. That would be extremely, extremely difficult. And depending on what the resolve of the Taiwanese are, I don't know if anybody has any understanding of what that looks like, but what is the civilian populace's ability to kind of wreak some havoc on an invading force, and what is their resolve to do so? I was listening to a podcast on my drive back up to Virginia today from North Carolina, and the congressman that was getting interviewed was talking about just the ability for for the civilian populace to play a pretty critical factor in this. And he's like, even if there's only 30% of the people that want independence, and those are that are the far leaning ones that really want Taiwan independence and will fight for it. He's like, you only need 3% of the population that's willing to really throw down to create a massive barrier for an invading force. But their means to be that hampering force is a little bit limited when you're thinking about the fact that it's not like America where everybody has a gun and whatnot. So
Yeah.
So this is just a quick photo of the major highway routes. There is a highway obviously that runs across the eastern side, but again, most of the population, most of everything, all the infrastructure, all the companies, the places where you're going to find semiconductor factories, all that stuff is going to be on the west side. And the whole entire island is basically traversed by Highway 1 and Highway 3 that just cross over each other at different areas, running all the way from Kaohsiung at the south up to Taipei and encircling Taipei. This next photo will show you Highway 1. Now, I show you this because a lot of the highway is suspended. There's a ton of the highway that is suspended at different areas to get over the different wetlands. There's multiple rivers that it has to cross across. And so when you're looking at that, what are some considerations that kind of jump out at you guys defending or attacking?
Both cut the island in half. Really severe interior lines of communication. So if you're Taiwan, let's say China decides to invade the south, cut the island in half, force them to either have a really hard trek north or choose a second invasion site.
So you're talking about like destroying your own highways?
Yeah, I mean those look like, it's not on the ground; it's pretty vulnerable. Reconstructing those would be a bitch.
Yeah. So not unlike the entrance to the ports where you just self-sabotage it to essentially ensure that it can't be used against you. The landing at Kaohsiung in the south, any ability to move north, I think would be extremely difficult because I think the plan is for Taiwan is to immediately kind of self-sabotage a lot of these areas. They've got their military bases in the south. They've got their military bases in the north. They don't necessarily need to be able to move south and north as much as I would think that China would need to be able to do that. You get rid of some of these highways, again, multiple river crossings, a lot of wetlands. Like you can see that this is, a lot of this right here is wetlands, but it's just not flooded right now in this picture. But tons and tons of, even away from the highways, there's tons of rice paddies, things like that depending on the time that you get there, the time of the year, a lot of them are flooded too, which just makes traversing that area extremely difficult. So I think the ability to, honestly, for Taiwan, the ability to self-sabotage is pretty vital for their defense plan. So there's a little bit of everything when you're looking at Taiwan. As far as even just getting on the island, you have the problem that there's limited beaches. The beaches that are there aren't great. The ports are small, the ports are big, but the entrances to them are small and easily defendable. And they're pretty spread out across the island. You're either taking the south or you're taking the north. So there's not a whole lot of in-between areas. So really helps Taiwan as far as concentrating their forces in certain areas to defend. And then there's obviously some pretty distinct areas where they would most likely attack. So you can kind of centralize forces. Sino, I don't know. Are you familiar at all with what the beach defenses, like the defense systems or anything like that, look like in Taiwan at any of those beaches? Are you familiar with that, or is any of that like public knowledge? I've come across a couple of things, but I'm not an expert on it.
No, let me figure out the best way to say this.
I know that if given the if they understood that an attack was imminent, let's say China starts massing forces, they got anywhere between two weeks and a month before an invasion. I'm sure they would start to do some pretty robust things. We're talking about like laying down mines on the beach, laying out sea mines on the avenues of approach to the ports and to the beaches. Just simple steel construction to hamper any amphibious forces that the same kind of things that we see on Normandy or any other beach. And then I've heard in a couple of sources, but not in a lot of sources, that they even have some bunker systems at some of these beaches. But that's kind of what I wanted to see if like you've heard that or not too.
Yeah, that's how I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. They like all those beaches that are highlighted. That and like a lot of the Taiwanese press releases about the exercises that they do, especially related to Hong Kong exercise. They know those are actually a mixture of pre-prepared and ad hoc sites or ad hoc positions, and they do have bunker systems at some of those beaches as well, and they can be massive. How best I can say this? You're looking at something that would rival Normandy, the Atlantic Wall.
You're talking about as far as like an invasion across the strait?
No, I'm talking about the defenses wise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because or not even that one, maybe even well, yeah, that's really that's what the one thing that comes to mind is the fact that they have these massive systems, massive firing positions where they can actually just pre-prepared, pre-dug, pre-made, so that whenever they do know which beach, they can narrow it down from like 41 or like 14 to like 2. They could just go there and concentrate all their forces right there.
Yeah. So there is a question in the chat, Riley, talking about, does Taiwan have the capacity to defend against simultaneous invasion sites? I think that they've structured it, and Sino, you can chime in after this real quick too, but I think they've structured it as such to have forces down next to Kaohsiung, because that is the most likely invasion site, as well as a lot of forces in Taipei and next to Taipei's beaches slash ports. So as far as those two go, I think they're pretty well statured for that. But if China were to get a little bit more creative, let's say that they were to try and go around to the east side and really spread out some forces in the central areas where there's not the greatest landing sites or anything like that, I think that might get a little bit, it might really start to test the ability to defend against anything like that. But I think if it's centralized on either of those two areas, and honestly, with most of the ports being centralized around those two areas, it seems like they're easily able to mutually support in those different areas. But again, Taiwan's standing army is what, like 160,000 people. China's obviously huge, but because of the limited access areas and the limited landing sites, it shrinks down the volume or the capacity that they can actually send ashore or at the beach at any one time. So it does kind of level it out to an extent.
Yeah, no, like they know the PLA, regarding amphibious invasion, they don't really have like the capability to conduct like creating 6 beaches like D-Day style. They may have enough people trained specifically to conduct a amphibious invasion to do maybe 1, at most 2 beaches, maybe 3 if they want to just throw in some cannon fodder brigades in there to stretch out the amphibious mechanized brigades and eventually the planned Marine Corps, to stretch them out. but overall they only have like enough for two landings.
And is that based on their equipment, Sana, or?
No, that's based upon their dedicated forces. Because the thing is with the PLA, and they have dedicated amphibious mechanized brigades whose sole purpose in life is to train for an invasion of Taiwan. In fact, that's what you usually see whenever you see like the PLA conducting beach landing exercises. The planned Marine Corps, the People Liberation Army, Navy, Marine Corps, is trying to move more towards that direction, but they never really had it. That wasn't really their mission set. Their mission set was more of a want to go in and take these islands in the South China Sea or guard these naval bases.
As far as amphibious landing capabilities, like ship wise and ship to shore assets, I think that they're, fast forward 5 years, they might be in a better place. But I think right now, I don't know if they have the capacity to do that either. To really spread it out. They
don't. I mean, this is one of the things that will be discussed in the logistical section of the paper. The logistics article is that they barely have enough dedicated amphibious assets, like actual like LPDs, LHAs, LHD, to conduct at least 3 brigades. So you're looking at probably half of their mechanized amphibious mechanized brigade forces, at least half. Not the 6.
Yeah, I was just looking at their numbers as far as amphibious carriers and all that stuff the other day, and it's actually surprisingly low. I mean, obviously all the hype around China is their Navy and how big their Navy is and all that stuff. But as far as amphibious landing capabilities and troop carrier capability, like that stuff is like, it's not that impressive. As far as, all the hype that goes around the size of their Navy right now. So
no, it's not. I mean, as a matter of fact, the PLA has actually been producing LCAT. Restarted production of a certain LCAT that can actually reach Taiwan, reach from mainland China to Taiwan. And so that's like 400 troops in total. So that's like a company maybe. I mean, it's almost like a drop in the water.
What were we talking about right there? Was that you're talking about amphibious or air?
No, amphibious.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I can go ahead and answer the amphibious, the airborne question as well.
Yeah, let me fast forward to the couple slides real quick, and we'll get to that one because I want to get to the next one up is the weather. So let's just let me blaze through these 2 slides, and we can start talking about that because that factors a lot more into weather.
Yeah.
So all right, so a couple of things. Bottom one is grainy, but it still shows the effect, right? So this is a view from one of the ports with a whole ton of fog, and then again another one over here of Taipei, but all you can see is the tip of the building because fog is pretty prevalent across the strait and covering the island a lot throughout the year. And then really quickly, another thing that you mentioned in the article as far as weather is Taiwan actually has like 2 typhoon seasons that they kind of suffer through. Anybody that's been stationed in Okinawa before, you know what it's like. We're only a few hundred miles up there, getting pounded by typhoons pretty regularly. I remember at least getting 6 or 7 typhoons in a year when I was stationed over there. So this really is that portion of the article where you highlight there's really only a couple months out of the year that this is really feasible. So if we see massing of troops around those timeframes, it's a pretty, it really narrows down when you'd be looking for that invasion force to start massing on the Chinese coast at those staging areas, because the weather is so crazy. I'm going to do something really quick. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to show you guys a map that I have here really quick. So let me pull this up. Hopefully you can see some of it, but so this is a 1944 silk map that was was given to obviously a naval aviator during World War II in the Pacific. And up here is China, and down here is Taiwan. Again, 1944, part of my prize collection. But the reason I show this to you is these lines coming down right here. These are basically the wind patterns for the year. The really thick red lines, that basically signifies that 75 to 100% of the basically days out of the year, there's a strong wind going through that area. So what you can really see is there's a lot of red lines that come straight through the Taiwan Strait. And this is signifying back in 1944 that the wind currents are just extremely, they're extremely difficult. So that really factors into, again, the months out of the year that it's available for any kind of cross strait invasion. Because now we're talking about air power and the ability to land troops in that method as well. So I just wanted to bring that up and show you guys because it just shows like how consistent those wind patterns and those weather patterns are that they were marking on the map in 1944 to give to American pilots, saying, hey, look, this area's got a ton of wind that comes through it. So yeah, we can talk about the potential for any kind of air assault and stuff like that now, just that we went through some of those weather conditions. So anyone want to chime in on what that looks like, or what you think that would be like, the potential for an airborne assault or airdrop?
This is, again, I'm sorry to favor again, but it doesn't seem like anyone's really jumping on this. So I might ask a different question, which is, where's anyone's thoughts on how the PLA would sabotage Taiwan's defensive preparations? Because like my reading, like a lot of successful, like let's look at American history, amphibious operations is our use of deception. In the case of D-Day, to spread out German defenses. So I'm curious if anyone has thoughts on the airborne operations thing. How would China sabotage Taiwan's defensive preparations?
Yeah,
they will. It is a great question. I mean, they will, but you also have to understand is that the Taiwanese will actually be on top of that, and they know that even within the ROC military, they can't really trust the people that they have, if that makes sense. Because there have been known instances where the PLA actually turned ROC mid-grade officers and NCOs as spies. Now, there's always been rumors that, some of those quote-unquote spies were in fact actually were supposed to be saboteurs as well. But that's only hearsay. But I wouldn't put any, but I only say that because the way the PLA will conduct missions is that they would rather have the Taiwanese military, or at least those people who they turned in the Taiwanese military, do it for them, rather than send in special forces to conduct sabotage missions, because they could use those troops on another to conduct other type of missions, like assassination missions, or going in the first hours of D-Day and destroy and conduct targeted operations against against SAM sites and ship cruise missiles, even some key C2 nodes.
Yeah, for most of the accounts, or most of the projections that I've read, when it comes to sabotage at the opening phases, a lot of it is centered around trying to assassinate political leaders, and then trying to sabotage, some key sites. I don't know how much of that would make it up to the beach areas. I think that a lot of it would be focused around some of those missile sites, possibly hangars, things like that, things that are a little bit harder for them to access with their own missiles. But I think that'd be crazy. That'd be a pretty crazy element to see how it would actually play out, because that would be pretty intense to see what those sabotages look like. And I don't know what the potential is for the sabotage on the other side. I've heard that there is some potential within China as well. I'd be curious if anybody has any insight on that.
Yeah, I'll chime in for that. Because that's something that like the CCP really like tries to push, is that like the Chinese people are kind of like a monolith and they all think the same. And that's really not true at all. And like even within the CCP, there's lots of different factions. So there's no way that this like the invasion of Taiwan will occur without Taiwan and the US government and other people finding out first. So there will definitely be some form of sabotage to China as well. And I'm sure like Taiwan or the US government or other governments have people who they've turned as well within the CCP.
I think probably what I think of when it comes to sabotage or deception specifically is information operations. And I don't think I've really seen a lot of good work done yet on like the actual effect of Chinese or Russian information operations within the United States. We're aware that there's been attempts made, that they have happened. I don't think anyone's really given a good assessment of like their overall impact. If I'm China, the first thing I'm thinking of is who's going to provide the biggest block obstacle to successful invasion as the United States. The longer the United States waits to actually make a decision with supporting, the longer the window is for a successful invasion for China. And so that's probably what I'm thinking of, is what are they going to do to influence domestic American opinion in a way that causes us not to act or wait too long to act.
Yeah, I think that would actually be a good thing to kind of unpack a little bit more too, with the maybe on the C2 meeting that we do, because I know that one of the upcoming articles is going to be on command and control and things like that. I wouldn't mind, hey Riley, if you want to get with myself and Sino offline later, maybe we could build in a little bit to unpack what information operations would look like inside of that sphere as well.
Yeah, I'd definitely be open to that. I guess you could shoot me a message, like a private message on Zoom or something like that. We get some contact information so we could kind of gear up towards something like that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I've gone through all
Chase,
the
real
slides I
quick,
have,
if you don't
but-
mind, I got a question along the same lines.
Yeah, what's up?
So I see that Joshua actually had pretty much the same question. So the KMT right now is an opposition party, and they're friendlier with China than they were in, say, the days of Chiang Kai-shek.
Mhm.
Is there any way they could apply some sort of political pressure that would essentially have the same effect that sabotage would in terms of Taiwan's defenses?
I would say no, because of the fact that, anything that they do that just seems as if they're trying to steer more towards the CCP or like getting better relations, they get hit in the polls. So to me, it's just, and there's been a lot of talk that about the CCP will use the KMT as like, oh, the leadership party, like they'll probably use them as the same thing as like what they did with the political parties in Hong Kong. But my rationale behind that is, well, I mean, let me back up. I think they're wrong in that regard, because by that time, what's the use of having the KMT there when the CCP had to literally invade this island and cause them so much trouble that for them it would be almost like useful idiots at that point, and so they were more likely to just throw them away as well, get rid of them as well.
Got it. Okay.
Rage, as far as the likelihood of Taiwan striking first by hitting an invading force while it's assembling before it leaves the port. And I haven't thought of, well, I can't say I haven't thought about that. I actually worked that into a war game that I'm creating right now. But yeah, I don't know. I would guess that they would do everything in their power to not strike first, because that would really, in my mind, I think that would sway some of the public. It would sway a lot of the public opinion and make it way easier for China to message, look, these guys attacked us. These guys hit us first. You know, they're gonna probably make that message anyways. But if they actually do it, that I feel like that cuts out the legs from beneath Taiwan to get a lot of the international community on their side. And I think that's a pretty vital part of this whole entire thing, is to be able to sway international opinion towards Taiwan. And if they strike first, I think that they really put they tie their hands behind their back if they do something like that. So I think they would try to avoid it at all costs. I can't really see a scenario in which that would be worth it to them. But at the same time, I mean, now you're talking about, well, do we allow forces to mass and then come across the strait? But I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, because I do know a big thing has also been like every time China's an exercise, they engage in very provocative movements. So I guess like it gives them that deniability in the future. So like when they actually do it, if they do get hit first, it gives them like some cover. Like it was just really exercises and like they're being aggressive, I guess. So makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, for them, I think one of the bigger things that you have to take into consideration is that for the Taiwanese, that if they're gonna ever like launch something like conduct first strike, they would have to take into consideration their ability to actually defend the beaches, and they know that. And whenever the PLA does start massing, they know that they either conduct these attacks, they either strike them now, or they wait until they they wait until they attack Pinghu Island, and to use as a preparation as a preparatory base. Because for Taiwan, you have to understand, at that point, Taiwan would be in survival mode. And so for them to say that, oh, well, we don't want to do first strike because, you know, because public opinion would be swayed towards and against us, I don't think they'll take that they don't really care too much, because they know that
it's impending.
Yeah, they know it's either all or nothing at that point. So they can't really say that, like, so they can't really say public opinion would be
and again, I mean, it probably comes down to, I mean, again, the notice that everybody would have that this is happening, right? I think the news outlets across the world would probably be broadcasting China's buildup of forces, not unlike they did with Russia 2 years ago, right? Everybody saw Russian massing forces. Everybody's like, this looks like an invasion. And it didn't really fool anybody too much. And so I'm guessing it'd probably be along the same lines. Everybody kind of understand. And you're right. I mean, people might not even, you know, and by people, I mean countries, might not even blame them for being like, well, they were put in the same position as Ukraine, obviously knowing that a coming attack was happening. And then they did what they needed to defend themselves up front. And so, yeah, that could be part of the decision calculus on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those things in which I wouldn't be too, I mean, I pointed out in the document in the article I wrote, that weather would terrain and weather would play a role in any amphibious staging that we would do and the PLA would do. And by the time we see that as both Taiwan and the United States and maybe even Japan, they will look at that and say, we need to either strike. It's going to be a like put up or shut up moment for them.
Yeah.
And say that we need to either strike now or wait until they cross the median line and they take out Pinghu Island. And I think for them, I think Taiwan, regardless if the U.S. even joins them, or U.S. and Japan would even join them, I think Taiwan would actually do it. The United States, it would really depend upon the circumstances of upon the United States willingness to actually go to war at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And with Japan, it would probably be the same thing, because they know that because they know for a battle for Taiwan is an exceptional battle for Japan as well, because they know if they take over Japan, if China takes over Taiwan, then they're essentially stuck between a rock and a hard place. Then there's like nothing to stop them. And then not only that, but just the fact that they could actually go in and take over not only Senkakus, but they could actually influence Okinawa to declare independence. Now, granted, it has a low likelihood of happening, but there has been instances where Chinese influence operations have been on that island, especially whenever incidents occurred between local Okinawan population and U.S. military forces there.
Yeah, I remember being briefed on China influencing protests that were happening on Okinawa when I was a lance corporal there in 2013. I had no idea what the hell China was at that point, but I still remember that. Yeah, so yeah, some good things. We're running up on about an hour and 30 minutes almost. Does anybody have any last questions? Again, we're going to do this every 2 weeks, every time an article comes out. I appreciate everybody hopping on here. Anybody have any lingering questions they want to throw out there that we can use to wrap up this conversation?
I just got one more. To talk about the allies and stuff. How does South Korea fit into all that calculus?
That's a very interesting question. As of right now, it really does look like they are willing to go to war. They may be willing to actually fight or join in any battle that may erupt between Taiwan, China, and the United States and everyone else in the region. Not only because they know the disruption of trade that would occur, but because Korea has always been the strip between two wells, if you will, and within that region, within the Northeast Asia region, between the Chinese well and the Japanese well. And so they understand that they would rather keep the status quo, but if possible, but they would rather instead of having a Chinese well dominate them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty clear. There's definitely a historical basis for them not wanting to go back to like a kind of subservient relationship with China. So that sounds right to me.
And there's a whole rabbit hole you could probably go down with that, and looking at, if this were to kick off China, Taiwan, what is the likelihood of North Korea using this as an opportunity to do something too? Rewind in time back to June 1950, when North Korea crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea. China was looking at crossing the Taiwan Strait to finish their business, and they would have if we didn't sail the 7th Fleet into this Taiwan Strait to stop that from happening. And then obviously they reposition on the Yalu, but yeah, I think it'd probably possibly be a domino effect happening in certain areas, other other stuff would probably be happening too. Possibly.
Yeah, interesting. China could probably also play a restraining effect on North Korea, because that could expand it beyond what they would want to.
Yeah, Joshua, same thing. All right, guys. I'm gonna stop the recording on this. Again, appreciate everybody coming out. Appreciate the thoughts and ideas. I like, the more back and forth between everybody like this, more so than the first time, just me talking a lot and then the question and answers at the end. So we'll try and structure it like this a little bit more. So when you're reading next week's article, think through some stuff, and we'll just kind of just go back and forth on it as we go through the following week's Zoom. So that'll be 2 weeks from now. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys. If you guys got anything for me offline, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on the Quantico Warfighting Society. I run Quantico Warfighting Society's Instagram page, so you can reach out to me on that. If you want to reach out to me, email, it's just quanticowarfightingsociety@gmail.com. So you're welcome to reach out in either one of those things, and look forward to seeing you guys in a couple weeks. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys.